Welcome back to Echo Ridge. Today we're going to turn this colony into an industrial powerhouse. But first, we of course have a couple of problems. You may remember from the last episode we added 9 more duplicants to this colony. We did it by packing 9 dupes inside the rocket, which we have now affectionately named the ESS P-Party Bus by combining a few different suggestions inside the comments. I appreciate everybody for giving me all the recommendations. Not only does it help the video performance, but it gives me a lot of ideas, so thanks. But anyways, whenever the ESSP party bus came, we now have a lot more duplicate labor to do all the temperature shift plates and all the other work that needs to be done around the colony. Unfortunately, I didn't think this 100% the way through. Remember, the oxygen system on this planetoid was only built to support 8 duplicants. Well, we now have 15. Granted, they spend a little bit of time inside the rocket sleeping using its oxygen supply, which, by the way, we're down to about 4 tons of oxalite. But the vast majority of the time, they're here on the planetoid, using its oxygen. And while right now it looks okay, this situation is not going to last. Lucky for us, we're still sitting at 108 tons worth of polluted dirt, so I think we're going to install our old oxygen system just to be able to supplement the new one. And this will help because it'll provide oxygen for another 6 duplicants. But don't worry, it's going to be temporary. Of course, we're going to surround the area with more deodorizers. Also reminding ourselves that each deodorizer can only process 90 grams of oxygen per second. So I think we're going to add a couple more down here this time. Since we've been digging all of this out, we don't really have to worry about sand anymore and are sitting pretty high on the hog at 54 tons. I also wanted to add something kind of humorous. The duplicants didn't have any problems digging all the way up here. You'd figure because they're not in suits that they'd have a hard time of it having to keep running back and forth, but because there's always slime being dropped off by meteors, there's always a little bit off-gassing. Not to mention all the polluted dirt, so it's not a great oxygen supply, but it does in a pinch. The next issue we have to contend with on this colony, just to ensure the safety of the duplicants so we can continue on with our projects, is dealing with all this heat. We've already started seeing a little bit of heat stroke coming out from the duplicants. We're averaging 50 degrees over here in the center of the base and 40s to 30s down here at the bottom, which is good because our dust caps can only go up to 35 degrees. So the sooner we can get some sort of cooling system in place, the better off we're going to be. But in order to do that, we have to make sure there's an atmosphere inside of our industrial sauna. That way we can run a thermal aqua tuner in it. I also saw a discussion in the comments that I wanted to comment on because I thought it was pretty interesting. There was some talk on whether or not industrial saunas are worth it. Now, when we start using words like worth it, we have to be very careful because that is completely subjective, because what is worth it to some people might not be worth it to the other. Now, if you're talking about something sort of objective like whether or not the heat being generated in here or the fact that we're spending all these materials to put heat-producing devices inside the sauna makes sense, and I think it does, for the simple reason that in this case, we're taking that heat and turning it into power by using the steam turbines. We're also destroying a certain amount of that heat in the process. You can set up elaborate systems for every single system on your colony and not put it in an industrial sauna. For instance, the rock crusher. But no matter what, it's going to generate heat. So what's the counter argument? Well, just using a thermal aqua tuner, putting it under a steam turbine, and setting a giant cooling loop around here. Because you're still going to be deleting the heat, except you're not going to be doing it inside the industrial sauna. In this case, we're doing a little bit of both. Not to mention the fact, in a case that you have 3 volcanoes, you might as well put all the heat-producing devices in here, because you need to build the room anyways. Now, on the subject of this specific sauna, this water is already at 96 degrees. I suppose at the lowest point it gets down to 84, so it's really close from being able to maintain. I'm going to try to accelerate this process by using some bottle emptiers. If I throw a bottle emptier around each volcano and keep dropping off more water on all of these hot materials, it should create a lot of steam pretty quickly that can then transfer it all down here. Not to mention the fact, in recent while, we've added a lot of these temperature shift plates, and some of them are still pretty cool. For instance, some of the newest ones are still sitting at 45 degrees, this one's at 20. So you get my point. But one consideration I need to take is I don't want to add more water to this sauna. This is already probably too much. So I'm going to put a pitcher pump in here and use this water to to drop off to all 3 bottle emptiers. All we need to do to make sure they only use it is disable this one and make sure there's no other pitcher pumps around the colony where they could steal other sources of water, which I don't think there is. Now it's time for discussion on some of the long-term plans for this colony. For instance, we're going to be... Oh, here we go again. Sulfur, why are you peeing in here, buddy? Why wouldn't they just come down to the bathrooms? The first thing we need to consider is why we're using this planetoid anyways. I mean, we're spending a lot of time not doing achievements just to set this place up. But if you remember, we're doing it so we have an easy and sustainable source of infinite metals for our home colony. So that's going to require a bunch of rad bolt generators so that we can exploit the radiation on this planetoid and putting it into some interplanetary launchers to send all that metal back home. Unfortunately, of all the good things this planetoid does have, one thing it is lacking on is radiation, which means we're going to have to use several rad bolt generators in order to make sure we're producing enough rad bolts so that we can operate enough interplanetary launchers. I'm thinking right now at least 2 interplanetary launchers. So all that being said means we're going to need a lot of power to run those rad bolt generators. Well, this place does have some natural gas generators, but as you know, it's not that much natural gas. Already, without any significant power consumers like thermal aqua tuners or the rad bolt generators we talked about, our natural gas generators are running on average of 30 to 40%, and our hydrogen generators are running at 50 to 60. So what else can we use on this planetoid to generate power? Well, the first one's pretty self-evident, and that's the steam turbines. But this is still not going to be enough power because the volcanoes are a very inconsistent source of power. Yes, we're going to be able to pick up all those metals and rotate them through to try to make it more consistent, but as soon as all 3 of these volcanoes go dormant, we're going to be up a creek without a paddle. So what else we have available to us on this planetoid? Well, we have metal. And how do you get from metal to power? By using the wonderful plug slugs. The plug slugs will eat the metal, create a bunch of hydrogen, and then we put that hydrogen into some hydrogen generators. So the slug plugs will give us power and food, and the natural gas generators are going to be able to give us the water to run our electrolyzer. So we have somewhat of a plan. We're not going to get to all of it today, but I at least wanted to let you know so you have something to look forward to. Some people might be wondering why I'm not just setting up the rail system now. And the reason is because this place is still a vacuum. Before you set up that rail system and all the auto sweepers and conveyor loaders that would be required, you really do need to have a sort of steam bath in here. In other news, our experiment from last episode finally paid off. Even though this volcano was submerged a little bit, as soon as it erupted, the cold temperature shift plate turned into a refined carbon tile. Yeah, we have a little bit of steam to deal with here, but not too bad. Now we've got both of these stifled until we figure out how to tame them in the future. Alright, I have a bone to pick with the plug slugs now. Apparently one little guy decided to go inside the little vacuumed out container we had and drop off some hydrogen. Thank you, Plug Sluggy. I had a door here, but I need to be able to get this heavy wrought wire in. So I think the solution is just, to exterminate the plug slugs. Look, they did it to themselves. There was do not trespass signs everywhere. You just can't see them. They just didn't read them. As for the water, it's happening because of all the rain. But to help prevent this issue from happening again, we're going to put a heavy watt joint plate and a couple of cobalt metal tiles. That way the rain can't interrupt our naphtha liquid lock. Luckily, nothing was able to get in. So as soon as we vacuum this out and fix this lock, we'll be right as rain. Step 1's complete. We've managed to fill this entire area with steam, and it's sitting around 111 degrees. And I'd like to keep it that way for as long as possible. In order to keep the steam pressure up and prevent the whole chamber from getting a little too cold, I put in a thermosensor that's set to above 140 degrees. What that means is these steam turbines are not going to turn on until this thermosensor says it's above 140 degrees in here. Once it dips below 140, well, they turn off. And that way it should hopefully never get too cool in here, as long as we're continuously producing heat. The next problem we have is we're down to 1,400 kilos worth of steel. And as you remember, I need to put in a few thermal aqua tuners, so I suppose it's time to set up a metal refinery. I've already been creating some ceramic and refined carbon. We needed the ceramic to make sure the pitcher pump didn't overheat, and we need the refined carbon to make more steel. And remember, that steel is not just going to be used for the thermal aqua tuner, but rather also the auto sweepers and the conveyor loaders. And oh dear goodness, what has happened? Why aren't you pumping? Why is there salt water down here? Oy vey, how did salt water get in here? I'm genuinely confused how saltwater got in here. My only bet is if saltwater happened to have fallen in this area here. So I started having serious problems with stress, and I'm like, I'm not quite understanding why. Oh yeah, that's right. All the duplicants that are sleeping in this rocket aren't getting any sort of barracks bonus. There's industrial machines in here, so this is not a barracks. Additionally, our little Great Hall here is only for the duplicants that live here. So in order to fix this and get it to the point where it's not absolutely destroying the duplicants, we're going to build another Great Hall right here. I think the last little touch is a nice gold metal block. I think we can put it right here. And there we go. We have a wonderful Great Hall again, which will give the duplicants the +6 to morale. And that way, John Archer and friends, stop stress vomiting absolutely everywhere. Just let it all out, buddy. You're going to be okay, as long as you don't starve to death in the meantime. In an effort to continuously make more steam in here, we're going to throw the metal refinery cooling loop down through this pond. Now, I don't have a lot of good stuff to be able to use for this coolant loop, and eventually we'll get to a point where it's just going to be too hot. So once again, I think we're going to have to melt some plastic to get the naphtha. And of course, as luck would have it, all 3 volcanoes are now dormant, because of course they are. Looks like I still need to analyze this one. The iron volcano, the hottest of all 3, is going to wake back up in 13.5 cycles. Now naphtha still has a flash point of 538 degrees, so we have to be a little bit careful. We're going to want that liquid to drop somewhere where we can grab it, and also to where it's not going to be so hot that it flashes into sour gas. We've also, despite the efforts, been running low on oxygen once again, so I've added another sublimation station system. This is now enough oxygen for about 12 duplicants off of polluted dirt, and then 8 from the electrolyzer. That should be plenty to make sure this entire area stays well oxygenated. One of the problems was we were still feeding the oxygen to the suits. So yeah, a duplicant would have plenty of oxygen when they're inside the sauna, but when they came back out, not so much. When I find that slug plug, not only am I going to kill it, I'm going to put its head on a spike, so that way it's a warning to all the other slug plugs. This makes me so very sad. I don't even know what to say at this point. I don't know what to do. I'm just kind of a little unhinged right now. I've done so much work inside this industrial sauna. Oh, Lasai. I mean, at the minimum, at least there's somewhat of an atmosphere in here, despite the fact that we've lost all our heat because all the volcanoes are dormant. Since it looks like we're going to be staying here for a bit longer than I anticipated because, everything's going wrong, not to mention the meteors are not being friendly these days, I think we're going to have to move out of the rocket. Reason being is we're down to 2.5 tons of oxalite and we're going to need some to get back, right? I think what we do is we turn this on grounded, so no duplicants are going to come in here and breathe this, and then we're just going to set up a new barracks for them. Conveniently located somewhere over here, which we're going to have to get rid of this abyssalite here because we're going to need a place for the carbon dioxide to flow down so that it eventually can get destroyed by this carbon skimmer. Alright, this takes 36 total tiles, and it's a little far away from the action. There's just not a lot of space where we have 36 total tiles. Alright, we found it. We're going to move it. Oh, I found you. Oh, I found you. Come here, Plug Slug. And after a few cycles, we now have duplicants sleeping in their new Rikazon resident Airbnb. And we're down to 72% stress, which I know sounds like a lot, but I promise you, it's at an all-time low. I'm at a crossroads where I have to wait a little while because I need this iron volcano to start erupting so I can make the naphtha, and I need the naphtha... Ooh, wait a minute. Why don't I just ship some super coolant over? Super coolant can go all the way up to 436 too, and it'd actually be here sooner than when this iron volcano would erupt. And I happen to have made a nice little convenient area right here just for such a thing. So we're gonna go take off naphtha, select super coolant. I need to remember that I have this pretty good interstellar launcher system going. I can send food, solids, and even liquids whenever I want. All the super coolant gets loaded pretty easily, and the launch is only 50 rad bolts. And in less than 10 seconds, Rikazon is going to get their first shipment of super coolant. Pretty handy. Make sure our targeting beacon is working well. Oh, look at that. And we already have plenty sitting inside of our payload emptier. And you might think, well, now I've got to connect a pipe and everything in here, but you really don't. All you need to do is click empty storage. Oh, look, another shipment just arrived. And just like that, we have almost 400 kilos worth of super coolant. Now, when loading up the coolant, I've sort of gone to a different method because I want the supercoolant to sort of sit on the outside of the pipes and this thing be full, and I know when I bridge the coolant on, it's going to go up through here towards the input. So the goal is to put the bridge exactly where you want it to stop. Now I know there is a little bit of hydrogen in here, but I think 30 milligrams is not actually enough of an environment to prevent, for instance, this liquid pump from overheating, for that matter, nor this metal refinery. But regardless, I need steel, so I don't care if we break a little bit of ceramic in the course of actually making it. Now, for the lime, remember we've been running those poke cells for a little while, so we have plenty of those. We've also been turning all the egg cells into lime coming from the slug plugs. So we actually have 1,300 kilos worth of lime already. So I am going to load the lime up in the first one. Second one's going to get the refined carbon, and the third one's going to get some iron. And boy, do we have plenty of it thanks to the iron volcano. That's still dormant. And without much fanfare, we're actually creating our very first piece of steel here on Rikazan. The supercoolant's coming out at around 126 degrees, but what's even better is by the time it finishes its cooling loop, it's already down to 97. So all of that heat's being dumped into this water. So now as long as I keep creating refined metal, we should eventually start seeing a little bit of steam here. The good news is all of that steam is sort of crushed the hydrogen. The bad news is it's all now sitting at the top. I'm going to wait until there's a lot more steam pressure. Right now there's only grams to see how many tiles worth of hydrogen that we have, because I may be able to just corner block it in and destroy it. But while we have just a little bit of steam pressure, I'm going to start working on this thermo aqua tuner. Now the idea behind the cooling loop is we're just going to have one thermo aqua tuner cooling the entire base. I'm not sure if I'm going to have them cooling the steam turbines yet, but I'm thinking one thermo aqua tuner with supercoolant should be plenty to do both projects. And while yeah, it's a lot of radiant pipe, I have 40 tons of cobalt sitting here. So we might as well start somewhere. The first stop for our radiant liquid pipes is going to be down here by our mushrooms. I think the next stop is actually going to be down here in our polluted water, because that polluted water is going to be going everywhere, so it'd be great if we can keep it temperature controlled as well. And then we're going to veer back up past this industrial area here, and then for convenience we'll go right up the ladder into the main part of the base, up this ladder, and then we'll venture this way, I believe. Oh yeah, this is going to be great. I'm going to have to build a lot of ladders to be able to reach all this stuff, but that's not a big deal, right? And then another key is we're going to put a bunch of metal tiles in here to make sure all this oxygen's staying cool. Not that it's a big deal because the supercoolant's going to be more than enough to keep the whole area cool, but every little bit helps. Which I think we will modify this a little bit using some steel radiant gas pipes, because while on the radiant liquid pipes you have a lot of options considering they are all refined metals, which are great thermal conductors. On the gas pipes, for some reason, they made the choice of making them all out of ores instead. And considering steel is sort of refined, it's better on the thermal conductivity front. I know it looks wonky, but it's going to give us the most bang for our buck, because then after that we're going to put down some beautiful aluminum metal tiles and then we'll brick the whole thing in. We've only been creating steel for a little bit and this water is already up to 100 degrees. It's not going to be long at all before this thing absolutely erupts. Will you look at that? The supercoolant does magical things. We now have 10 kilos worth of pressure inside this sauna, and all the hydrogen has been compressed into one, sometimes two tiles. So now all we have to do is corner build it in. Actually, never mind. Apparently the steam just deleted it. Well, that's convenient. While I have this opportunity, it'd probably be good if I started the rail system. The whole idea is we're going to take the steel that we've been creating, we're already up to 5 tons, and install auto sweepers somewhat close to these volcanoes. Believe it or not, they can't get too close or they will end up overheating, because even using steel, it'll only make the auto sweeper, for instance, have an overheat temperature of 275. So we need to be careful. I'm going to try first this location here on each of the volcanoes. The reason why you want to do the conveyor rail and the auto sweeper system is because it's going to help maintain that heat, because all of these little chunks of metal are basically little thermal batteries. And because all the metal here is going to be the hottest it will ever be, I don't think we're going to start the rail here. I actually want to start it down here. So what we're probably going to do is drop all that metal down to a point, say somewhere around here, and then have another auto sweeper that picks it all up and starts the huge rail system. Another key to this system is how much steam pressure is actually in here. Right now there's 30 kilos, which is plenty to be able to absorb the initial eruption of the volcanoes, which will help keep the auto sweepers and the conveyor loaders nice and cool. For the rails, we don't really care what they're going to be made out of, save in the positions that cross right in front of the volcanoes, because even though the rails don't have an overheat temperature, they do have a melting point. But once again, the steam pressure in here should help mitigate that fact. Remember that giant pool of water? We're already down to maybe 1.5 tiles worth. Now granted, there's entirely too much steam pressure down here at 79 kilos, but it'll eventually make its way all the way up here, where the steam pressure is sitting around 40. We have to be careful because there is a maximum steam pressure to where these volcanoes will no longer erupt. But remember, we're going to be cleaning all of our water in here too and taking it out and supply that water to our oxygen system. In other good news, it looks like our coolant loop is finished up. That's good. And courtesy of our friends over on Tuxedo, we have 1,200 kilos worth of super coolant. I don't know if that's going to be enough, but it's what we're going to work with. Same system as before, except we're just going to bridge it on, say, right here. We're also going to make sure this liquid pipe thermal sensor says if it is above 25 degrees, I think that should be good. All of our systems in here are going to need power, and instead of running another large power transformer, we're just going to start building them in here. In fact, most of those power producers are going to end up in here in the long run anyways. The hydrogen generators produce no byproducts, so we don't have to worry about it. The carbon dioxide we can pump out, and the polluted water, well, it'll just flash into more steam. And all of this will help keep that sauna hot, to include the natural gas that's going to be piped in there. That's going to be sitting at 150 C. Starting to come together. I know you thought it never was going to, but it is. In the course of creating all my rails, I realized I had forgotten to extend the cooling loop to cover the steam turbines. But then I realized we're going to have another thermal aqua tuner anyways, because right now, all that metal is going to be coming out at around 100 and something degrees. So we're going to have to build a debris chiller here to cool it down further. And that thermal aqua tuner, responsible for keeping the debris chiller cool, can also cool the steam turbines. So for now, just for the purposes of putting all of our metal in one spot, we're just going to drop it all right here. Well, with all of that water gone, I suppose we don't need these pitcher pumps anymore. Absolutely wonderful. All said and done, 70 kilos down here and about 64 up here. While the duplicants are building all those rails, I figured it's time to put our rock crusher in here. After all, we're up to almost 8 tons of steel. That's more steel than I think we've had in the entire game. And by getting rid of the rock crusher out here, we just help make this system even more efficient, because the rock crusher produces 16,000 DTUs worth of heat, which tends to add up over time considering how often they use the rock crusher. At long last, our coolant is going in the line. What you're looking at here is about 200 kilos worth. I don't think I'm going to have enough to fill the entire loop, but I also don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. Not to mention, we have plenty more where that came from, so I'm going to queue up another, 50 super coolants? That'll give us 5 more tons, and we'll send a couple over to Rikazan. While the dupes are finishing that up, I wanted to show you our new slime collection system. Because we get slime meteors in here, which is the exact reason why we chose to use mushrooms for a little while, the meteors are now going to hit down here at the bottom, which we're occasionally going to have to repair, but we're going to get a lot of slime in return. Our system's almost ready, but I did want to highlight the fact that even though there's 60 kilos worth of steam pressure, the volcano still can erupt. It's not that big of a deal. And it looks like the entire rail network is done, as long as I didn't put a bridge in the wrong spot. And it does not look like I have. So we can go ahead and turn this on. For simplicity, we can just say all. The auto sweeper is going to grab it, throw it into the conveyor loader. Now, while this thing gets started up, because all this iron's very, very hot, there is a chance the conveyor loader will overheat, but I think we're going to be okay. We can also do the same thing over here and over here. Oh, it looks like this one's finally starting to erupt again. It's got a very short active period. You can see it only goes active 38 cycles out of 70. But all those beautiful hot metals get dropped off right here, and then this conveyor loader can say all as well. And not only is it going to grab everything that is landing here, it's also going to grab everything that's coming out of the metal refinery. I don't think I want to use all that steel yet, so I'm going to uncheck it from the conveyor loader system. And because this thermal aqua tuner is drawing so much power, and we've been solidly using the metal refinery and the rock crusher, we're a little low on power right now, so I'm going to let it catch up for a little bit. Remember, the long-term plan is going to be using those plug slugs to create more hydrogen, If I can get enough steel, I'll put a nice bunker door system in here so we can run solar power as well. Even though there's only 30,000 lux here, compared to something like the gassy Moo planet that has 80,000 lux. That'd be cooking with some fire. Or how about Scorchado that has 100,000 lux? Speaking of which, I'm hoping that new update that's coming out soon, if you have not heard about it, there's some changes coming. The next update has to do with gassy Moos. So I'm really hoping that it's going to apply to pre-existing colonies, because we still have a long way to go with this one. But considering we have so much surplus natural gas and we're still not using enough power, we're going to put in another natural gas generator. This is once again going to be temporary because eventually this whole system is going to be moved into here. And then finally, to make the system even better, we put a power control station in this area, sealed it up, and now our natural gas generators are going to give us 1,200 watts worth of power. So before we started this, we went from producing 1,600 watts to now producing 3,600 watts. Except it might help if I actually connect the whole thing to the power spine itself. Yes! And just like that, everything comes back alive. We've got metal falling from the sky, being loaded in the conveyor loader, and then taking the long trip over. Looks like the cobalt's coming out at like 200 and something, the gold just over 130, and all those thermals are being distributed throughout the sauna, and then ending up in here where we don't have to worry about the temperatures quite yet. Speaking of thermals, even with the supercooling coolant loop not being 100% full and only running for a little while, the temperature in the base looks a lot better. And eventually, this cooling loop will override all this pre-existing heat, especially when I manage to move all the power systems into the sauna. I hope you enjoyed the progress that we made today. It definitely was a longer episode to record. I'm not sure how it's going to end up on the editing, but I suspect it's going to be a little bit longer than normal. I'm having a great time continuously terraforming this planetoid, and it's starting to look a lot different than how we started with it. As a reminder, please continue to support this series by liking the videos, and that way YouTube continues to know that you're enjoying it. So until next time, much love, happy gaming, and I'll talk to you soon.